Texas. Cowboys, oil, and Friday night football. That's what everybody thinks of. But underneath all that swagger and sunshine, things get strange. Really strange. And I'm not talking about the weather. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. So if you caught our episode on Minnesota strangeness, you know that we took a spin on what we call the Weirdness Wheel, touring all the strange and unexplained corners of the land of 10,000 lakes. Well, we're doing it again, but this time we're heading south, way south, to a state so big it could swallow most European countries whole and still have room for seconds. And you know the saying, everything's bigger in Texas. The stakes, the trucks, the egos. Texans will be the first to tell you, and honestly, they're not wrong. But here's what nobody warned you about. The weird stuff? That's bigger too. Now, Texas has some legendary stories that most people have already heard of. The ghost of the Alamo, the haunted railroad tracks at San Antonio, La Llorona, the Driscoll Hotel. Those are all incredible and they deserve the full treatment. If you want us to come back and give any of those classics the full in-between deep dive, let us know in the comments. But today, we're going deeper. We're going to cover some stories that even some native Texans might not know about. So put on your 10-gallon hat. Let's give the Weirdness Wheel a Texas-sized spin and see where we land first. And we are starting with a story that is not a legend, not a tall tale, not some campfire yarn that got stretched over 200 years of retelling. This actually happened, and the true story is more disturbing than anything a folklorist could have invented. It's the summer of 1850 in South Texas. A Mexican bandito by the name of Vidal and a few of his compadres have just rustled a horse herd south of San Antonio. Now, stealing horses in 1850s Texas is already a bad life decision. But the part that makes it a truly catastrophic life decision is who comes after them. Texas Ranger Creed Taylor and a frontiersman by the name of Bigfoot Wallace. Yes, that was really his name. And he earned it. They catch up to Vidal. And what Bigfoot Wallace does next is the kind of thing that makes you set your phone down and just stare at the wall for a minute. He beheads Vidal, takes the corpse and lashes it upright onto the saddle of a wild Mustang, ties the dead man's hands to the pommel, and secures the torso so it's sitting up straight, like a rider. Then he takes the severed head, still wearing its sombrero, and ties it to the saddle horn. Then he releases the horse. Just let that image settle in for a second. A wild Mustang, buckling and thrashing through the South Texas brush country with a headless corpse strapped to its back and a sombreroed head along for the ride. Now, that's not a ghost story. Apparently, that's a Tuesday for Bigfoot Wallace. For years afterward, terrified travelers report seeing a headless rider tearing through the remote South Texas mesquite country at dusk. Posses are sent to track it down. Settlers shoot at it. Native Americans shoot arrows at it. Nobody can stop it. It just keeps riding. Eventually, a group of men manages to corner the horse at a watering hole near the community of Benbolt, south of Alice, Texas. The corpse is still strapped to the saddle, riddled with bullet holes and arrows from every person along the way who had tried to bring it down. They bury what is left of Vidal in an unmarked grave. And that should be the end of the story, right? Horse caught, body buried, mystery solved. Except sightings of El Muerto, the dead one, keep coming. People continue to report a headless horseman galloping through South Texas. Not in the 1850s, not in the 1860s. Another sighting is reported near Freer, Texas, as recently as 1969, over 100 years after Vidal's body is pulled off that horse and put in the ground. Now, I also want to point out that this has nothing to do with Washington Irving. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow came out in 1820, 30 years before Bigfoot Wallace turned Vidal into a permanent saddle ornament. Texas has its own headless horseman. And unlike Ichabod Crane's, this one started with a real body, a real ranger, a real punishment that was so brutal it apparently echoed across a century. Welcome to Texas Weird, everybody! And we're just getting started. But don't you kind of wish we still had Bigfoot Wallace around? Someone standing guard so you don't have to worry about who's watching? But since he's not around, that's why I use Ghost VPN, the sponsor of today's video. The truth is, when you're online, whether it's your internet provider, public Wi-Fi, or even your home network, there are plenty of ways your activity can be tracked. Even incognito mode doesn't fully protect you. That's where CyberGhost comes in. It encrypts your connection and hides your IP address so your browsing stays private. They also have a strict no logs policy, meaning your activity isn't stored anywhere. You can connect through 100+ locations worldwide, which not only improves your privacy, but also lets you unlock content from over 40 streaming platforms like Netflix and Prime Video, or even find better deals online just by changing your virtual location. It works on all major devices, and with one subscription, you can protect up to 7 devices at the same time. CyberGhost already has over 38 million users and an excellent Trustpilot rating for more than 20,000 reviews. So it's one of the most trusted VPNs out there. Right now, you can get it for just $2.03 a month, plus 4 months free, which is 84% off. And it comes with a 45-day money-back guarantee. So there's no risk in trying it out. So yeah, maybe we don't have Bigfoot Wallace watching our backs anymore, but at least we can protect ourselves online. Links in the description and pinned comment. All right, now that we've got some protection going, let's get back to just how weird Texas really is. Now, while we're in the folklore neighborhood, let's stay in South Texas for a minute, because I need to introduce you to something that Tejano families have been using to terrify their children for generations. And honestly, after looking into it, I kind of get why. La Lechuza. If you grew up in a Tejano household anywhere south of San Antonio, you already know this name. You probably just got a chill hearing me say it. And if your abuela ever caught you outside after dark, there's a decent chance La Lechuza was the reason she dragged you back inside by your ear. La Lechuza is described as a massive owl with the face of an old woman, with a wingspan rivaling the length of a pickup truck, and talons sharp enough to tear through bone. The mythology says she's a witch who either sold her soul to the devil or was cursed after death, and that she shapeshifts into this giant owl form to hunt and bring misfortune. But it's her methods that will really get under your skin. She doesn't just swoop down out of nowhere. She lures you out first. She can mimic the sound of a baby crying outside your window. Or she'll whistle. Just a simple soft whistle in the dark. And if you're curious enough or concerned enough to step outside and look, that's exactly what she's waiting for. The legend was brought to Texas by settlers crossing the border in the 1700s and 1800s, and it has been embedded in the culture of South Texas ever since. But what bumps La Lechuza out of the bedtime story category and into something a little harder to dismiss is this. In 1975, police in Robstown, a small city just outside Corpus Christi, starts getting calls. Lots of calls. Residents are reporting a massive bird in a wooded area between Bosquez Street and Rab Road. Multiple people all calling independently of each other. The community is freaked out. A real wave of hysteria rolls through the town. 2 years later, 1977, it happens again, this time in Santa Rosa, Texas. Multiple witnesses report seeing La Lechuza perched in a tree. And then it moves. It swoops down and scratches at a woman's front door. It doesn't do a flyby or just circle overhead. It comes down and claws at the door like it's trying to get in. Now, witnesses across these incidents describe a creature anywhere from 2 to 7 feet tall with a wingspan of up to 15 feet. For reference, the largest owl species in North America, the great gray owl, has a wingspan of about 5 feet. Whatever people are seeing in Robstown and Santa Rosa is at minimum 3 times that size. That's not a misidentified barn owl. So is La Lechuza a bruja in feathers? An undiscovered species of massive raptor? Or just generations of folklore doing what folklore does best, turning shadows and sounds into something with teeth and talons? I have no idea, but I do know that this legend didn't just survive the trip across the border. It thrived, and it's still alive in South Texas today. Ask around. People will tell you. Just maybe not after dark. All right, let's spin the wheel again. And if I got a good one for you, because this story has everything: a monster, mass hysteria, a police investigation, and the single greatest timing coincidence in cryptid history. July 1969. The entire country is glued to their TV sets. Apollo 11 is days away from putting a man on the moon. Walter Cronkite is practically living on the air. And Neil Armstrong is about to take one giant leap for mankind. It is the biggest story in the history of the world. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Fort Worth, Texas, something very different is taking a giant leap. Out of a tree, onto somebody's car. July 10th, 3 couples are out at the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge, right on the edge of Lake Worth. And they come running to the police with a story that, on any other week, would have been front page news coast to coast. They say they encountered a creature about 7 feet tall, part man, part goat, covered in a combination of fur and scales and long clawed fingers. They tell police that it jumped from a tree and landed on one of their cars, leaving scratch marks on the exterior. Now, if you're a police officer in 1969 Fort Worth, what do you do with that? You file a report, and then you probably refile it under things I am not telling the guys at the station. But those 3 couples are not the last ones to see this creature. More reports start rolling in, and then comes the incident that really puts the Lake Worth monster on the map. This creature allegedly picks up a car tire and throws it at a group of witnesses. How far? Somewhere between 450 and 500 feet. For some context on that, the world record for the shot put, a 16-pound iron ball that Olympic athletes train their entire lives to throw, is about 75 feet. Whatever was out there at Lake Worth chucked a car tire, which weighs considerably more than a shot put, 6 to 7 times that distance. So either this creature had the arm of a demigod, or the laws of physics took the night off. A man named Alan Plaster manages to snap a photograph of what appears to be a white man-sized shape. It's blurry because, of course it is. Has there ever been a cryptid photo that wasn't blurry? But evidently, it's good enough because the newspapers go nuts. And bless their hearts, they run the Goatman story right alongside Apollo 11. Because in Texas, a monster sighting and a moon landing apparently deserve equal coverage. What happens next is pure Texas. Locals don't hide in their houses. They grab their guns, pile into their trucks, and drive out to Lake Worth at night trying to find this thing. The nature center is overrun with people hunting for the Goatman. It is chaos. Armed civilians stumbling around in the dark in a nature preserve looking for a 7-foot goat creature. What could possibly go wrong? And then September rolls around. School starts back up. And just like that, the sightings stop. Gone. Whatever's been terrorizing the shores of Lake Worth apparently follows the academic calendar. Now, the story just sits there for decades as one of those great unsolved Texas mysteries. Until 2005, when the Fort Worth Star-Telegram receives an anonymous letter. The writer claims to be one of 3 high school kids who had decided to go out to Lake Worth and scare people in a costume that consisted of a tinfoil mask. That's it, tinfoil. Then in 2009, another person comes forward and confesses to the famous tire throwing incident. Their explanation? They didn't throw it 500 feet. They rolled it from a junkyard that happened to be on top of a hill, and gravity did the heavy lifting. So, case closed. Kids in tinfoil, tire on a hill, pack it up, everybody. Except the couples who reported the first encounter described the creature before those kids supposedly went out there. The scratch marks on the car were real. Last time I checked, tinfoil doesn't leave gouges in sheet metal. Multiple independent witnesses gave descriptions that were consistent with each other, but inconsistent with a teenager in a homemade tinfoil mask. And frankly, the idea of high school kids running around in the pitch dark at a nature preserve full of armed, terrified Texans is arguably more reckless than the monster itself. The Lake Worth Goatman is almost certainly a hoax. Almost. But almost is doing a lot of work in that sentence. And 36 years of silence before an anonymous confession doesn't exactly scream credibility either. Real or not, BuzzFeed's video on it has pulled in over 23 million views. The Goatman has become a Fort Worth legend. They love him out there. So whether he was real, whether he was 3 teenagers with a dream and some Reynolds rap, one thing is for sure. In the summer of 1969, while the rest of America was looking up at the moon, Fort Worth was looking into the trees. And something was looking back. Now, we're still on cryptids here because I am not leaving this category after just the Goatman. Not when Texas is quietly one of the biggest Bigfoot states in the entire country. When you start talking about Bigfoot, I think most people think Pacific Northwest. Washington, Oregon, maybe Northern California. Nobody thinks Texas. But maybe they should. Because according to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization database, Texas has over 260 reported sightings. That puts it in the top 10 of U.S. states. And most of those sightings are concentrated in one region, the piney woods of East Texas. If you've ever been to East Texas, it is a completely different world from the rest of the state. Forget the wide open plains and the desert. East Texas is dense forest, towering pines, thick underbrush, swamps, bayous, miles and miles of isolation with very few people in between. It looks more like Louisiana than it does the Texas you see in the movies. And it's exactly the kind of terrain where something big could hide. Reports out of the piney woods go back to the 1830s. The Caddo tribe had their own stories of hairy giants in the pines long before European settlers arrived. A 1924 encounter was published by the Texas Folklore Society. Montgomery County leads the state with 16 reported sightings, followed by Liberty County and Cass County. And then there's Jefferson, the little town of Jefferson, Texas, which has a population of about 2,000 people, officially proclaimed itself the Bigfoot capital of Texas in 2018. They've been hosting the annual Texas Bigfoot Conference since the year 2000. It's a whole thing out there. The most notable researcher in the Texas Bigfoot community is Craig Woolheater. Craig has his own sighting on May 30th, 1994, while driving from New Orleans to Dallas. Whatever he saw that night changed his life. He co-founded the Texas Bigfoot Research Center in 1999, which later evolved into the North American Wood Ape Conservancy. That's right, they don't even call them Bigfoot anymore. Now they're wood apes. They're that serious about it. And I'd be doing Texas a disservice if I didn't mention Lyle Blackburn. Lyle is a native Texan, the state's premier cryptid authority, has multiple books under his belt, and has narrated several cryptid documentaries. Oh, and he's the vocalist for a rock band called Ghoul Town. Because of course, the guy who hunts monsters in East Texas swamps also fronts a band called Ghoultown. It's Texas. That just follows. Now, for those of you who watched our Minnesota episode, this next part's for you. You remember the Minnesota Iceman? The mysterious frozen ape man that Ivan Sanderson and Bernard Hoovelmans spent 3 days examining? The one that Frank Hansen carted around at county fairs? The one that ended up on eBay, selling out of Cottage Grove, Minnesota, of all places? Well, guess where it ended up? Austin, Texas. A guy named Steve Boosty bought it and put it on display at his Museum of the Weird on East 6th Street, where it sits to this day. So, if you're ever in Austin and you want to stare at what is almost certainly a latex model covered in real bear hair that two of the most respected cryptozoologists of the 20th century swore was the real deal, you can do that for about $12. Texas and Minnesota, connected by a frozen ape man in a gift shop. I did not see that crossover coming, but honestly, it's kind of perfect. If Bigfoot is going to retire anywhere, of course, it's Austin. All right, that was fun, but I need you to buckle in now because the next story is a hard turn. No more monsters, no more legends, no more campfire stuff. What I'm about to tell you happened to real people. It left real scars on their bodies, and over 40 years later, nobody has ever been held accountable for it. This is the story of Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and a 7-year-old boy named Colby. And what happened to them on a back road outside of Houston is one of the most physically devastating UFO encounters ever documented. December 29th, 1980. It's about 9 o'clock at night, and 51-year-old Betty Cash is behind the wheel, driving down a dark, isolated 2-lane road through the pine and oak forest near Huffman, Texas, northeast of Houston. With her in the car are her friend Vicky Landrum, 57, and Vicky's 7-year-old grandson, Colby. They're heading home after going out for dinner. Just a regular night. Until it isn't. Up ahead, through the trees, they spot something glowing. Their first thought is that it must be an airplane, something coming in low toward one of the Houston airports. But as they get closer, they realize it's not an airplane. It's not a helicopter. It's not anything they have a name for. It's a massive diamond-shaped object just hovering there above the road at treetop level. Flames are shooting from the bottom of it in bursts, like a rocket firing intermittently, and with each burst it rises slightly before settling back down. Betty stops the car. They can feel heat radiating through the windshield from inside the car. It's so intense that the dashboard becomes too hot to touch. Betty gets out for a better look. I know, but put yourself in that moment. You're on a dark road in the middle of nowhere and something impossible is floating right in front of you. Part of your brain is screaming at you to run, but another part can't look away. Betty couldn't look away. She stands outside that car, staring at this thing for several minutes. Vicky, who is a devout Christian, is inside the car with Colby, convinced they are witnessing the end of the world. She's telling Colby not to be afraid, that when he sees the fire, Jesus is coming. That's the level of intensity we're talking about. A grandmother preparing a 7-year-old for the second coming. When Betty finally tries to get back in the car, the door handle is so hot it burns her hand. She has to use her coat as an oven mitt just to open the door. The car itself is too hot to touch. The entire encounter lasts about 20 minutes. And then, as the object starts to rise and move away, something else appears that takes this from a strange and intense sighting to a whole new level. Helicopters. A lot of them. Betty, Vicky, and Colby count 23 helicopters in tight formation around the craft, not trailing behind it, surrounding it like an escort. Vicky and Betty later identified them as tandem rotor Boeing CH-47 Chinooks. If you don't know what those are, think of the big military helicopters with 2 rotors, one on each end. They're distinctive, hard to mistake for anything else. and there were 23 of them forming up around a diamond-shaped craft that was shooting fire from its belly. Let me just park there for a second. 23 military helicopters. That's not some rogue pilot stumbling across a weather balloon. That is a coordinated military operation. Somebody authorized those helicopters. Somebody ordered those pilots to go up. Somebody knows what that craft was. And yet, not a single branch of the United States military has ever acknowledged having helicopters in the area that night. Not the Army, not the Air Force, not the Navy, not the National Guard, not the Coast Guard. Nobody. 23 Chinooks. And every branch of the military says it wasn't us. But the craft and the helicopters are not the worst part of the story. The worst part is what happened to Betty Cash. Within hours of the encounter, Betty starts getting sick. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And then her skin starts blistering. Severe blistering, like a burn victim. Her eyes swell shut. Her hair starts falling out in clumps. Over the next few days, she develops large, painful knots on her head and neck. She can barely function. These symptoms are consistent with acute radiation exposure, like you see in nuclear accident victims. And this is a woman who was, just a few hours earlier, perfectly healthy, standing on a country road looking at something she couldn't explain. Vicky and Colby got hit too, but not nearly as bad as Betty did. Most likely because they stayed inside the car, which must have provided some shielding. But they developed burns, weakness that lingered for years, and ongoing health problems. Vicky later developed cataracts. Colby had recurring nightmares and anxiety that followed him into adulthood. But Betty's condition was the worst by far. She was in and out of the hospitals for years. Her health never fully recovered from that night. Whatever she was exposed to on the road near Huffman, it did permanent damage to her body. So naturally, the family did what any American would do. They got a lawyer. Betty and Vicky filed a lawsuit against the United States government for $20 million on the theory that whatever that craft was, the military was clearly involved because of those 23 helicopters. Makes sense, right? You see a government aircraft escorting an unknown object that burns you with radiation, you go after the government. But here's the catch-22 that would be almost funny if it weren't so infuriating. The case was dismissed. Why? Because you can't sue the government for operating a craft that no branch of the government admits exists. The military said, "We don't know what you saw, but wasn't ours. We don't have any record of it." And since the plaintiffs couldn't prove which specific branch or agency was responsible, the case was thrown out. Seriously? The government's defense was essentially, we can't be held liable for something we refuse to acknowledge happened. And it worked. Now, investigators have gone back and forth on this case for decades. Skeptics have suggested the witnesses saw a fireball from an industrial flare or a meteor, or that they misidentified conventional aircraft. But none of those explanations account for the physical injuries. You don't get radiation burns from watching a flare stack. Meteors don't hover at treetop level for 20 minutes. And no known conventional aircraft in 1980 matched the description of what those three people saw. John Schuessler, a NASA aerospace engineer and MUFON investigator, conducted one of the most thorough investigations of the case. He documented the medical records, the witness testimony, and the military's refusal to cooperate. His conclusion was that something real and physical happened to those people, and that the military's involvement, given the helicopter presence, was undeniable, regardless of what they were willing to admit on the record. Betty Cash passed away in 1998 on the 18th anniversary of the encounter. She never got answers. She never got justice. And she never fully recovered from what happened to her on that road. Vicky Landrum spent the rest of her life dealing with the health effects and the frustration of a government that wouldn't even admit it was there. She passed away in 2007. Colby, who was just a little boy sitting in the back seat that night, grew up carrying the physical and emotional weight of something that should never have happened to a child. To this day, no one has provided a conclusive explanation for what happened near Huffman, Texas on December 29, 1980. No agency has claimed the craft. No military branch has claimed the helicopters. No one has explained how 3 civilians on a quiet road ended up with injuries consistent with radiation exposure from a source that officially does not exist. That's not a story. That's evidence. Evidence that somebody has the answers, and they're just not sharing. Before we move on, as you guys probably already know, we rarely ask you to hit the like button. But hey, if you're enjoying this and you want to see more like it, it really does help more than you realize. But only if you really like it. No pressure. Okay? Moving on. Now, you might be thinking that the Cash-Landrum case is a one-off, a freak event, something that happened once and never again. But Texas has a way of proving you wrong, because 28 years later, it happened again. Not the radiation, not the injuries, but a UFO sighting so big, so public, and so well documented that the government tripped over its own story trying to explain it away. January 8th, 2008. Stephenville, Texas, in Erath County, a small ranching community about 90 miles southwest of Fort Worth. Population, around 17,000. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody, and if you make something up, you're going to hear about it at church on Sunday. That evening, people start seeing something in the sky. Not just a couple of people, at least 17 witnesses filed official reports. But estimates from the ground put the real number in the hundreds. Farmers, business owners, pilots, just regular people looking up and seeing something that should not have been there. What they described was a large, silent, metallic object, triangular in shape and approximately a half a mile long. Half a mile! With bright, flashing strobe lights running along its surface. It moved slowly across the sky. And then it didn't move slowly at all. Steve Allen, a pilot with years of flight experience, is watching from the ground. He tracks the object visually and estimates that when it decides to leave, it accelerates to roughly 3,000 miles per hour. For reference, an F-16 fighter jet tops out at about 1,500 miles per hour. Whatever this thing is, it's moving at twice the speed of our fastest fighters. And speaking of fighters, Steve also reports seeing 2 military jets chasing this thing across the sky. So, naturally, reporters start asking the Air Force some questions. At first, the Air Force's response was a flat-out denial. None of our aircraft were anywhere near Stephenville that night. End of story. Except it wasn't, because MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, did something that changed the entire conversation. They filed Freedom of Information Act requests and obtained radar records from the FAA and National Weather Service. Actual radar data, not eyewitness accounts, not blurry photos, hard data from federal tracking systems. Those reports showed an object operating without a transponder, tracked on radar for more than an hour. At times, it was stationary or barely moving. Then it would accelerate in a heartbeat before decelerating just as fast. 2 of the radar data points matched witness accounts down to the time and geographic location. The witnesses weren't imagining things. The radar saw it too. With the radar records waving in their faces, the Air Force quietly reverses course. They issue a correction admitting that, actually, almost a dozen F-16s from the 457th Fighter Squadron at Naval Air Station Fort Worth had been conducting training exercises in the area that night. The very same jets they had just told everyone weren't there. So tell me that again. The initial response was not, we're looking into it. It was not, we can neither confirm nor deny. It was a flat no. No jets, period. And then when the radar data comes out, suddenly it's, sorry, our bad. It was actually about a dozen of them. How do you go from 0 to 12? How do you forget that you had nearly a dozen F-16s in the air? The Air Force's explanation for the sighting itself was that witnesses were simply seeing those training jets and misidentifying them. But the witnesses weren't describing jets. They're describing a single, massive, silent, triangular craft half a mile long. F-16s are about 49 feet long, and they are anything but silent. They shake your windows when they fly over. Nobody is confusing an F-16 with a silent half-mile triangle. And the radar data didn't show a dozen F-16s flying in formation. It showed something else entirely. Something without a transponder. Something that could go from a dead stop to speeds that no known aircraft can achieve. The military's shifting story didn't put the Stephenville case to rest. It did the opposite. It made people trust the official explanation even less. Because if the answer was really just training jets, why lie about it first? What was there to hide? The Stephenville sighting remains one of the best documented mass UFO events in American history. Hundreds of witnesses, radar confirmation, and a government that couldn't keep its story straight for more than a hot minute. All right, after those last two, I think we could all use a breather. Quick side note for my BEK fans out there. If you've watched any of our Black Eye Kids episodes, you probably already know the story. But did you know that the entire phenomena started right here in Texas? In Abilene in 1996, a reporter named Brian Bethel was in his car parked in a parking lot when he was approached by two kids with eyes like black voids. That one encounter brought a once unspoken phenomena to the forefront, and it all traces back to the Lone Star State. If you haven't seen that story, we'll put a link to the episode in the description. Go check it out. And speaking of things in Texas that nobody can explain, let's talk about what happened to 6 cows in the spring of 2023, because this one is gonna bother you. April 19th, 2023, Madison County, Texas. A rancher finds one of his cows dead in a pasture, a 6-year-old longhorn cross. Now, cows die. It happens. But this cow didn't just die. Something had been done to it. Its tongue is totally gone, cut out with what investigators describe as a straight, clean cut. The skin around the animal's mouth has been removed with precise edges. And here's the detail that made everyone's skin crawl. There's no blood. None. Not in the cow, not on the cow, not on the ground around the cow. A cow has about 10 gallons of blood in its body, and somehow not a drop of it is anywhere near this animal. Over the next 5 weeks, 5 more cows turn up in the same condition across Madison, Brazos, and Robertson counties, all along State Highway OSR. Same clean cuts, same missing tongues. 2 of the 5 have circular incisions removing the anus and external genitalia with the same surgical precision. No ragged edges or tearing. Clean, deliberate cuts that look like they were made with a scalpel or a laser. And then there's the detail that really gets to investigators. In every single case, there's no evidence of a struggle. These are 1,000-pound animals. They don't go quietly. But there's no signs of thrashing, no disturbed earth, no drag marks. The cows are just lying there, almost like they've been placed. And there are no footprints around the bodies. No boot prints, tire tracks, predator tracks, or even disturbed grass leading to or from the carcasses. However these animals were killed and mutilated, whoever or whatever did it didn't leave a single trace of having been there. Now, cattle mutilations are not new. They've been reported across the American West since the 1960s, with the most famous wave hitting northern New Mexico and southern Colorado in the 1970s. But this 2023 cluster in southeast Texas follows the same pattern that has baffled investigators for over half a century. Surgical precision, no blood, no tracks, no explanation. The usual suspects get trotted out every time this happens. Predators, scavengers, insects. And sure, in some cases, decomposition and scavenger activity can mimic the appearance of clean cuts. Blowflies, for example, target soft tissues like the tongue and eyes first, and the resulting damage can sometimes look surgical to an untrained eye. But the ranchers and investigators in Madison County aren't untrained. These are people who've been around livestock their entire lives. They know what a coyote kill looks like. They know what scavenger damage looks like. And they are adamant that what they are seeing was neither of those things. The cuts are too clean. The lack of blood is too complete. And the total absence of tracks or disturbance around the bodies is something none of them can account for. The Animal Legal Defense Fund put up a $5,000 reward for any information leading to an explanation. As of today, nobody has collected it. No arrests, suspects, or even a conventional explanation has been confirmed. The cases remain open. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was aliens, but I'm also not going to sit here and tell you it wasn't, because I don't know. Nobody does. But what I do know is that 6 cows in 3 Texas counties were found dead with parts of their bodies removed with a precision that doesn't match any known predator or scavenger in a pattern that has been repeating across the American West for over 60 years, and not a single person has ever been caught doing it. 60 years. Same methods, no answers. And the pattern just keeps going. Now, I want to take us somewhere a little different than everything else we've talked about today. No creatures, no ghosts, no government cover-ups, just lights. Lights that have been appearing in the West Texas desert for over 140 years. Lights that science has partially explained, but cannot fully account for. Lights that are still showing up right now as of the making of this video. The Marfa lights. In 1883, a young cowhand named Robert Reed Ellison is driving cattle through Paisano Pass in far west Texas, middle of nowhere. The nearest town is a speck on the map called Marfa. And as the sun goes down and the desert opens up in front of him, he sees something out on the horizon. Glowing, flickering, moving lights. And he thinks, well, it's got to be Apache campfires. Reasonable guess, so he rides out to investigate. He gets to where the lights were, and there's nothing. No ashes, no campsite remains, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Just empty desert. 2 years later, Joe and Ann Humphreys reported the exact same lights in the exact same area with the same result. No explanation. In 1919, a group of cowboys got curious enough to ride their horses over the mountains to try to find the source. They came back with nothing. The lights appear on Mitchell Flat, a stretch of open desert east of Marfa. They're roughly the size of basketballs and appear white or blue or yellow and sometimes red. They don't just sit there. They hover. They merge together into one light. They split apart into 2 or 3. They twinkle. They dart across the horizon and then vanish. Sometimes they're there for seconds, sometimes minutes, and then they're gone, like someone flipped a switch. During World War I, military observers in the area were genuinely concerned that the lights might be signals guiding an enemy invasion across the Mexican border. During World War II, pilots from Midland Army Airfield flew missions specifically to search for the source from the air. They found absolutely nothing. So what are they? Well, researchers from UT Dallas did find an answer for some of what people see out there. Car headlights on US Highway 67, which runs through the area, can get distorted by layers of warm and cool desert air. This creates what's called a superior mirage, where the light bends in a way that makes it appear to float and flicker on the horizon. That probably does explain a good chunk of the sightings, especially the ones reported after the highway was built and car traffic picked up. The problem is that this doesn't explain how Robert Reed Ellison saw these lights in 1883. There were no cars on Highway 67 in 1883. The only lights in any direction were stars and campfires, and he already ruled out the campfires. So what was he seeing? And even in the modern era, the headlight theory doesn't cover everything. Between 2000 and 2008, monitoring stations set up in the area documented an average of about 9.5 light events across just over 5 nights per year. Some of those lights displayed behaviors that no car headlight can produce, no matter how much atmospheric distortion you throw at it. Color shifts from white to red to blue. Backward movement going against the direction of traffic. Sudden appearance and disappearance with no fade, no drift, just there and not there. Today, there's a free public viewing area set up by the Texas Department of Transportation on Highway 90 between Marfa and Alpine. Open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's got a covered shelter, informational plaques, and red filtered lights so your eyes can adjust to the darkness. People come from all over the world to sit out there in lawn chairs in the West Texas desert, staring at the horizon, waiting. Some nights they see nothing. Some nights the lights put on a show. You never know what night you're going to get. And the people of Marfa, a quirky little art town of about 1,700 people that has somehow become one of the most interesting small towns in America, have embraced the whole thing. The Marfa Lights Festival happens every Labor Day weekend. It's part of the town's identity now, and it has been for decades. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. We can explain some of the Marfa lights, maybe even most of them, but not all of them. And the ones we can't explain have been showing up since before there were cars, before there was electricity, before there was paved roads within 50 miles of Mitchell Flat. Whatever those lights are, they were here first. And on the right night, if you're patient enough to sit in the dark and watch, they're still out there, dancing on the edge of what we can explain, daring us to figure them out. Okay, let's spin the wheel again. For this little adventure, we are heading to a bridge, but not just any bridge, a bridge in Denton, Texas, that has become one of the most visited paranormal locations in the entire state. And unlike a lot of haunted places where the scariest thing is the gift shop, this one comes with a history that is genuinely disturbing. Not because of what may or may not be haunting it, but because of what may have actually happened there. Old Alton Bridge was built in 1884. Simple iron truss construction, nothing fancy. It connected the town of Denton to the small community of Copper Canyon. And for decades, it was just a bridge. You crossed it. You got to the other side. You didn't think about it. But at some point, a story attached itself to those iron beams. And once it did, it never let go. The legend centers on a black goat farmer named Oscar Washburn. The story goes that Oscar was a great goat farmer and consequently became pretty successful and well known in the goat farming world. Well enough known that he puts a sign on the bridge that reads, "This way to the Goatman." It's just advertising, smart marketing for a goat farmer in rural Texas. Come buy your goats from Oscar Washburn this way right across the bridge. But this is the 1930s in the American South, and a successful black man with a sign bearing his name on a public bridge does not sit well with everyone. In August of 1938, according to the legend, members of the Ku Klux Klan came to Oscar Washburn's farm. They drag him from his house, take him to the bridge, put a noose around his neck, and throw him over the side. But when they look down, the rope is empty. No body, no splash. Oscar Washburn's just gone. Pissed off that Oscar has somehow escaped, the Klansmen go back to his house to look for him. The house is empty. The entire Washburn family has vanished. Now, I gotta be honest with you here. Researchers have had a very hard time verifying that Oscar Washburn actually existed. Historical records from that era, especially for Black families in rural Texas, are incomplete at best and non-existent at worst. There's no definitive documentation of a man by that name living in the area at that time. What is well documented is what people experience at that bridge today. The legend says that if you knock 3 times on the bridge's iron trusses, you summon the Goatman. And people come out to test that theory on the regular. Visitors report seeing ghostly figures moving through the woods on either side of the bridge. Strange lights that appear and disappear with no source. The sensation of being touched or grabbed by something unseen. Some people have had rocks thrown at them from the darkness. Actual physical rocks. The bridge was closed to vehicle traffic in 2001 and is now for pedestrian traffic only, which honestly makes the whole experience worse. Because if you're walking across it in the dark, on foot, with the trees pressing in on both sides and the only way back being the way you came. Paranormal investigators have made Old Alton Bridge a regular stop. Ghost hunting shows have featured it, and it's become a pilgrimage site for people who want to see if the stories are true. I don't know if the spirit of Oscar Washburn haunts those iron trusses. I don't know if something supernatural is out there in those woods throwing rocks at teenagers who knock 3 times and then regret it immediately. But I do know that bridge carries a weight that has nothing to do with engineering. It's a place where real history and legend have fused together into something the locals say you can feel when you stand on it. And whether that feeling is a ghost or just the gravity of what that place represents, stays with you either way. Now, I've saved this last story for the end on purpose because everything we've covered today, all the creatures and ghosts and lights and things the government won't talk about, I want to leave you with something a little different. A story that starts as a monster tale and ends somewhere you won't expect. 1836, the Navidad River down in the Sublime area of southeast Texas. Settlers in the region start noticing something strange. Food goes missing from their homes. Tools disappear, except the tools come back, polished and repaired. Torn clothing vanishes from clotheslines and reappears a few days later, carefully stitched up, usually better than it was before. Whatever is taking these things is not a thief, at least not in any way these settlers can make sense of. A thief takes things and keeps them. This thing takes things and fixes them. Slaves in the area give the entity a name. They call it the thing that comes. And for years, that's all anyone knows. Something is out there in the brush along the Navidad River. It comes in the night. It takes. It returns. And nobody can catch it. The legend grows as legends do, and the thing that comes becomes a supernatural being in local folklore. A spirit, a demon, something not quite human that haunts the riverbanks and slips through the darkness with abilities no normal person could possess. This goes on for 15 years. 15 years of ghost story that the whole region tells and retells, each version getting a little stranger than the last. And then, in 1851, they catch him. It's not a spirit. It's not a demon. It's a man. A human being living naked and alone in the dense Texas brush. He's been surviving out there for years, sneaking into homes in the dead of night to take what he needs and returning what he can. But how? How do you sneak into occupied homes for 15 years and never get caught? Never wake the dogs? Never trip over a chair in the dark? They find a sailor who speaks his language, an African dialect. And through that sailor, the man tells his story. The thing that comes is actually a prince from West Africa who was captured as a child and sold into slavery. The details of where exactly he was held and how he got free got lost somewhere in time and retelling. But we know he made it to the banks of the Navidad River. And once he did, he never let anyone find him again. He disappeared into the Texas wilderness with nothing but the knowledge his people had passed down to him, including, amazingly enough, the specific hours of the night when dogs enter their deepest sleep and do not wake. This man survived alone in the wild using knowledge that had been handed down through generations of his people. He knew the land, knew the animals. He knew the rhythms of the households around him so well that he could walk into their homes, take a torn shirt, walk back out, repair it, and return it without anyone ever seeing his face for a decade and a half. The settlers had spent all those years building a legend around something they couldn't explain. A monster, a ghost, the thing that comes. And the truth was so much more extraordinary than any of those stories. It wasn't something supernatural. It was a man so skilled, so resourceful, and so determined to survive that he became invisible. A prince stolen from his homeland who refused to be owned by anyone and carved out an impossible existence in the brush country of Texas. J. Frank Dobie, one of the great chroniclers of Texas folklore, published the account in his 1928 book, Tales of Old Time Texas. And I think the reason it stuck with me is because of what it says about all the other stories we tell. We see something we can't explain, and we reach for monsters, for ghosts, for aliens, for anything other than the possibility that the truth might be stranger and more human than we're ready to accept. Sometimes the thing hiding in the dark isn't a creature, it's a person. And their real story is more remarkable than anything we could have invented. And that's what I love about Texas. Every other state has its ghost stories and legends, but Texas takes it to another level. A headless horseman that was real. A UFO encounter that put a woman in the hospital with radiation burns. Lights in the desert that have been dancing for 140 years. And a monster that turned out to be a prince. You can't make this stuff up. And in Texas, you don't have to. Big thanks to Ghost VPN for sponsoring this episode. If you want to protect your privacy online, check out the link in the description or pinned comment. You can get it for just $2.03 a month, plus 4 months free and a 45-day money-back guarantee. So it's completely risk-free. Now, we've done Minnesota, we've done Texas, and the Weirdness Wheel is just getting warmed up. So tell us in the comments what state we should cover next. If you made it this far, you're my kind of people. And my kind of people are gonna love this episode right here. Click on it. You won't sleep tonight, but you'll thank me tomorrow. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.